Okay, I believe we are live. All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Lauren Martin Clements, and I am the head of marketing at Pipestream. It is the third Thursday of the month, which means it is time for another Pipe Up webinar, where we get to deep dive into the expert minds behind Pipestream. Today's webinar is called Generative AI, Charting the Course for Future Artificial Intelligence Technologies. And our speaker today is Winslow Marks. Winslow is a non-binary linguist who has been working with machine learning models for just shy of a decade. They started their career working on Amazon Alexa, identifying issues with the speech recognition and natural language understanding models, and recommending resolutions. After that, they had a brief stint as a copywriting prompt engineer before becoming a solution designer at Pipestream, where they get to combine their experience working in AI with a variety of other technologies. When not working, they're probably playing video games, playing with their cats, or watching science videos on YouTube. Winslow, I am pumped you are here. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Lauren. All right. So the goal of this presentation today is to give a brief overview of generative AI market trends and how that affects the way we use it. So our agenda today is pretty short. First, I'll be giving a quick summary of how the industry's grown in the last 5 years or so. Next, I will introduce the concept of multimodality as a likely direction the industry's headed. After that, I will give a rundown on what some of the common issues are when working with AI that likely aren't going to be going anywhere anytime soon. And finally, I will recommend some practical techniques for getting good results out of generative AI that'll be applicable now and in the future. So, generative AI is an unbelievably fast-moving field. This is not what I wanted to be when I grow up, because when I was growing up, an AI that could speak or paint was firmly in the realm of science fiction. Now, talking to a computer and having it talk back to me or create a unique piece of artwork is just a normal Tuesday. So when we're talking about generative AI models, we can't define them in terms of lines of code like a normal computer program. So usually we measure their size in parameters, which is what we call the rules that the model has come up with based on its training data. So the more parameters, the larger the model, and these increases tend to be tied to major improvements in functionality. So this table is showing the number of parameters in transformer models released by Google since 2018. So we started with BERT at 340 million parameters, and up to now, the more recent Palm model has 540 billion parameters. So their models have increased in size more than 1,000-fold. And it's gone from a technology being used quietly in the background, supporting searches, doing machine translations, to now a flagship product that's used by consumers on its own merits for a huge, unknowable number of different use cases. So switching to some data on OpenAI, which is arguably the name brand of generative AI, so their flagship model family has gone from around 100 million parameters to 1 trillion, which is the sort of size increase that's hard for the human brain to even grasp. And that's just one piece of the puzzle, too. There are lots of improvements that they can make that make models more skilled without actually changing the size. So, for instance, I was doing prompt engineering when GPT 3.5 was released, and that's a model that's based on the same training data set as GPT-3, but using a more advanced training method. So when this was released, my team noticed almost immediately that its ability to understand rhymes and generate poetry had been hugely improved. So I've been working in this field since 2015, and the state of AI is pretty much completely unrecognizable today compared to where it was when I started. So the future of AI isn't just going to be more of the same. We can definitely expect functionality to keep improving, but there are a lot of use cases that are pretty well established by now, so the industry is looking to tackle new things. The next thing is likely going to be multimodality. So this is the ability of a machine learning model to handle inputs of different types. Some common types of input include text, images, and audio. There are some AI-powered entities today that maybe appear to have multimodal capabilities, but usually this is kind of an illusion created by chaining together multiple models which are each trained specifically for one task and feeding their inputs and outputs into each other. Multimodality is actually available today. Some of the more recent models like GPT-4, ChatGPT Plus, and Google Gemini have multimodality functionality available, and you can use them now. Google Gemini is actually available for free. They offer a UI where you can interact with it in a sort of a chat context. So having all of this functionality combined into a single model is going to make it a lot simpler and more reliable to implement really complicated use cases. When you have more systems interacting with each other, that kind of inherently means you're introducing more risk into the system. So one single model that can do all of this at the same time is going to make for a much more stable and fluent experience in working with it. So now let's take a look at an example using Google Gemini. So here I asked Gemini to write a story and create an illustration at the same time. I asked it to write about a purple serval. It's a kind of African wildcat, lives in the savannah. It's not usually purple. So the illustration it's generated here is a pretty good likeness of a serval kitten. There's a little bit of a purple tinge to its fur. And then Gemini goes on to create this story where the serval is named Pip. He meets a lioness who has a golden mane, which is a little interesting. And she teaches him to be proud of his unique qualities. So I asked it to give me a cute story. I think it definitely did that. I'm not 100% satisfied with the illustration, though, so I can go back and ask Gemini to work on this. So I wanted an illustration a little more related to the story. So I asked Gemini if it could illustrate a specific scene for me. It chose the scene where Pip meets the lioness and offered me 4 options to choose from. So it's a little confused about whether the lioness should have a mane or not, which is fair. The story it generated is not quite in line with how things tend to work in the natural world, so that's kind of understandable. But it's made Pip purple, and it's not just producing output in text and images, it's actually doing them both simultaneously. And not only that, it's still remaining aware of what it's created, and it's using them to feed into one another. I didn't have to tell it much to get it to do this. I asked it to show a specific part of the story, and it chose the most visually interesting part based on what it had generated. And just so you know, you can also upload images into Gemini, so you can have it interpret or reimagine an image you already have, ask it to talk about it. The possibilities are only going to be growing. The thing that I like to keep in mind is that this technology is still kind of in its infancy. So right now, this is the worst that it's ever going to be. So even with all these leaps and bounds in technology, there are some problems that aren't going to be going anywhere soon, even when we're working with these super sophisticated models. So one common problem working with AI is its tendency to create hallucinations. So this is information that's maybe presented as factual, it sounds plausible, but it doesn't really line up with reality, maybe like a lioness with a golden mane. So this is an especially challenging problem to solve because it's kind of born out of the inhuman creative abilities of AI. That also happens to be what AI is most valuable for. Even if a human might be less inclined to share some types of misinformation, we don't need AI to perform like a human. We already have those. So we don't want to eliminate the good aspects of AI that we like with in pursuit of getting rid of this kind of sort of hard to nail down problem. So another thing to contend with is that once a model is trained, its training data is frozen in time. Creating these models requires a lot of data, a lot of time, and a lot of human effort. So by the time a model is released to the public, it's already pretty outdated in terms of its world knowledge. So we were well into 2020 before most large language models were able to handle input related to COVID-19 because it didn't exist prior to 2019. So none of its historical training data had anything about it. And finally, one of the most frustrating aspects of working with AI is its black box nature. So the calculations involved in training a model and generating its outputs are so complicated and interconnected that even the people who create these models can't really explain how and why it reaches the decisions that it does. So this is a thing that's called explainable AI. There are a lot of people that are working on it. But it's just not a small problem to solve, and so it's probably going to be quite a while before we see any real forward momentum there. So now it's finally time to talk about how to actually deal with all of this. I wanted to call out retrieval augmented generation first here, because I think it's simply one of the best tools that we have to get good results with AI. If you provide a reliable source of truth, we can limit the risk that AI will make something up because we're not asking it to provide any facts, we're providing them. And if your source of truth is dynamically updated and accessible, you can ensure that the information is up to date too. So for example, one use case that I personally worked on here at Pipestream is using generative AI to match user inputs to stores in a mall directory. So before we call the AI, we first pull in that directory information so that we can use it in the prompt. That ensures that the information about available stores is always up to date, even if a store just opened that morning. And I never need to actually personally inspect the stores list to make sure of that. So something that will always be important is crafting your prompts carefully to ensure that you're getting good results for your use case. Something that's really important here is iteration. So if you don't like the results that you're getting, find something to change and see how that affects your results. Even if you can't really see anything in the prompt that's causing a specific problem, it's still valuable to find something to change, even if you're just maybe swapping things around, changing the wording a little bit. Because differences that to a human mind might seem insignificant can actually lead to hugely different results with an AI. It's also probably in your best interest to get familiar with some advanced prompting techniques if you're going to be working with AI frequently. So we don't have time in this session today to go into detail on that, but I did want to call out a few specific techniques that you can use, such as few shot prompting, which is another way of saying including examples in your prompt. So this is something that I also worked on at Pipestream, helping a colleague build a prompt to Google Palm to format information into a JSON so that we can send it to a platform that will interpret the JSON content. So to make sure it would always put the same values into the same fields with the same name, we included an example of the JSON that we were asking it to generate so that it won't go off script. Another thing that I mentioned here is chain of thought prompting, which is where you ask the AI to solve a complex problem by breaking it down into smaller steps first. And this has been shown to hugely help with accuracy. And finally, my advice is that if you're going to be using AI for work, you should use it for fun too. With everything, practice makes perfect. So if you find something fun to do with the AI, that can help you get a feel for working with it. So even if your use case is something as frivolous as a story about a purple serval, it'll still teach you about how the model behaves, and it'll get you used to the process of interacting with the AI. So for example, I like to use it to create character art for Dungeons and Dragons sometimes. I'm sure if you have a hobby, there's probably a way that you can shoehorn AI into it. So that does it for the scripted portion today. Happy to answer questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Winslow. All right, so I have one question here, which is when you're implementing generative AI, what are some of the concerns that you get from your clients?
Yeah,
What are they asking?
I think the biggest concern is probably hallucinations. People are generally worried if we're going to be putting AI generated responses into a solution, like where the client is going to be liable for whatever that AI says. So some people may have seen in the news a few weeks ago, Air Canada had kind of a sort of a quick and dirty implementation of an AI assistant, and it actually told someone that they were eligible for a refund that they were not eligible for. And I believe it was taken to court, and Air Canada was told that they actually did have to refund this person because it was this agent that was acting on their behalf, and so they're responsible for what it says. And so we can deal with that in a couple ways. We like to be conservative with generative AI applications a lot of the time, so we're not necessarily going to be showing something that's generated by AI directly to the user. Maybe we're using it for something more on the back end. And another thing that's really valuable is that if you are using AI to produce responses, you probably want to have some kind of a disclaimer that this response was generated by AI so that the user can know that this information may or may not actually be reliable.
That is really, really good advice and actionable. That's great. All right. Winslow, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. If you're listening on LinkedIn or watching on LinkedIn, please continue to send in your comments and questions, and we'll do our best to answer and respond. Have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone, and see you in the next month's Pipe Up webinar.